My name is Dorothy Ellsworth. The night my father told me I was no longer his daughter, something in me shattered so deeply it never healed the same way again. He didn't yell. He dismissed me like I was nothing. That silence cut harder than any curse, and from that moment on, I knew love could vanish in a single breath. Winter on the Maine coast doesn't forgive. The wind cut across my face like blades, whipping salt from the ocean into my eyes as I stood at the threshold of the house I had grown up in. Behind me, the walls that once held my childhood laughter now felt like a fortress I'd been exiled from. My belly was heavy, every step a reminder of the mistake my family believed I embodied. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried enough steel to split me open. Final, sharp, unquestionable. My brother stood beside him, arms crossed with that smug curl on his lips, as if my downfall was his victory. Through the window, my mother's outline trembled, her hand pressed against the glass, fogged by her own breath. She never opened the door. The suitcase I dragged behind me rattled against the frozen steps. The wheels caught on ice, and the sound echoed through the quiet night like a gavel striking down judgment. Each pull away from that porch was heavier than the last, but there was no turning back. Down the hill, the ocean roared against the rocks, relentless and cold, mirroring the silence that had just replaced my family. I glanced back once. The house glowed in warm yellow light, steady and indifferent, as if nothing inside had changed. For everyone else in that home, life would go on. For me, the light confirmed a truth I could never outrun. There was no space left for me there. That night carved a wound that would follow me for decades, but it also lit the fuse for everything that came after. The place I found wasn't much, just a cramped attic over an old bakery that smelled perpetually of yeast and sugar. The scent clung to my clothes and hair. Sweet at first, but eventually suffocating. When it rained, the ceiling leaked in 3 separate spots, and I'd set out bowls to catch the drops, hoping none would fall on the thin mattress I called a bed. Days blurred together. I worked at the diner from morning to mid-afternoon, scrubbing counters and carrying trays. Evenings I washed dishes in the back of another restaurant, steam fogging my glasses until my eyes stung. At night, I lay beneath a worn blanket, one hand over my belly, listening to the ocean groan beyond the window. The walls were thin, the world colder than I'd ever imagined. But I whispered to the life inside me, as if she could already hear. We'll make it, somehow. On the peeling wall above the mattress, I taped an overdue electric bill and scrawled in shaky pen, "One more day." It became my mantra, a bargain with myself. I only needed to survive another 24 hours. Rachel arrived in that cramped attic on a stormy night, wrapped in a borrowed blanket from a neighbor with pity in her eyes. She was impossibly small, yet the weight of her in my arms anchored me. I promised her, quietly but fiercely, "We will live at any cost." Then came the threat of eviction if I didn't pay up by month's end. The thought of dragging my newborn back into the streets made me sick. Fear pressed in on me, sharp as the November wind, but I clenched my jaw. I had been thrown out once. I wouldn't let the world do it again. At the diner where I worked, a man sat alone in the corner most mornings, sipping black coffee without sugar. His name was Hale, and though his back was bent with age, there was a steadiness about him I couldn't ignore. He wore his navy cap low over his brow and spoke sparingly, but his eyes noticed everything. He saw me scribbling notes between orders, jotting anatomy terms in a battered notebook I hadn't touched since before everything fell apart. One afternoon, when the lunch rush had died down, he slid a folded pamphlet across the counter. "Military medical program," he said, voice gravelly but kind. "Scholarship, training, a way forward. Listen, kid, strength isn't never falling, it's standing up the 11th time." I wanted to laugh, to tell him he didn't understand, but something in his words clung to me long after I went back to refilling coffee cups. That night, after Rachel finally drifted to sleep against my chest, I pulled the pamphlet from my pocket My hands trembled as I signed my name on the application. The following week, Rachel spiked a fever. I rocked her in my arms, panic tightening around my ribs. For a moment, I nearly tore up the form, telling myself survival meant keeping life as simple as possible. But then I pictured Hale's steady gaze, that scrap of paper like a doorway cracked open. The choice was brutal, but clear. I wouldn't quit. Not for me, not for her. I pressed the pen harder, sealing the signature with the only thing I had left: resolve. The first morning of military medical training, my name was barked like an insult. "Ellsworth, you think this is a daycare?" The sergeant's voice cracked across the room, and the class erupted in laughter. Heat climbed into my face, but I locked my jaw and said nothing. My fists curled at my sides, a flash of memory from that porch slamming into me, reminding me why I was here. Every day was a battle. I studied anatomy diagrams while rocking Rachel in her battered stroller, whispering facts under my breath as she drifted to sleep. Nights stretched long under the yellow light bleeding through the barracks window, textbooks open, exhaustion clawing at me. Sometimes Rachel woke sobbing, her cries piercing the quiet. I would walk her down the corridor, the sound of marching boots echoing from outside, and wonder if I truly belonged in this world. Then one evening, as I gathered my notes, a medical officer approached. His voice was low but steady. "Most of them are betting you won't last. I don't believe that. Don't prove them right." His words branded themselves into me, repeating in my head whenever I faltered. Not long after, a plain envelope slipped into my hands. The handwriting trembled across the page. "If the seas are rough, remember I am still praying for you." My mother's voice on paper, faint but real. I pressed it to my chest, then tucked it into my boot. It stayed there, against my skin, like a hidden heartbeat. The field exercise was meant to measure stamina and skill, but when a fellow trainee lost his footing and tumbled into a ravine, the test changed. My orders were clear: finish the course, leave the weak behind. Instead, I hurled myself down, wrapping cloth around my hands to brace against the rocks. Every pull tore skin, but I refused to let go until he was back on solid ground. My score plummeted. The evaluation marked me down as a failure, yet the commander looked me dead in the eye and said, "You chose life over points. That's what I'll remember." That night, Rachel touched the bandage on my arm with small, gentle fingers and whispered, "Mom, you're my hero." Her words hurt more than the wound, because I knew I could never let her down. But the world had its own ways of cutting me open. A friend slid a newspaper across the table. There was my father on the front page, standing tall at a podium, my mother and brother beside him, all smiles under the banner of family values. The headline read, "Ellsworth and his perfect family." Perfect. Without me. Without Rachel. I shredded the page with shaking hands, but Rachel bent to pick up the scraps. She held up a piece with his face on it and asked in a voice that stabbed straight through me, "Who is he?" California hit me like another planet. Gone were the slate-gray skies and salt wind of Maine. Here the sun baked everything into a pale haze, and the training fields smelled of dust instead of brine. The military hospital was a world of its own. Shouts, metallic clatter, the sharp tang of antiseptic mixed with blood. My days blurred into suturing torn flesh under harsh lights, splinting broken bones, while someone screamed 2 feet away, and scrubbing my hands raw before racing to the next emergency. Every morning, before I shouldered my bag, I hung my new ID badge on a nail beside a photo of Rachel, grinning wide, her hair sticking out in every direction. It was my ritual, my quiet reminder. This is why you're here. Then came the shift that broke me open. 36 hours straight, running on caffeine and willpower, until my knees buckled in the middle of an operating room. When I came to, a curtain drawn around me. Rachel was sitting on a hard chair by the bed, her small hand wrapped around mine. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Mom, don't leave me." The words sliced through my fog. Whatever pain, exhaustion, or fear I carried, surrender wasn't an option. She was the reason I had to stand back up. Recognition found me quietly. After a mass casualty drill gone wrong, I stabilized a wounded soldier under fire and earned a commendation from command. The letter felt like a lifeline folded in official paper. But that same week, a teammate showed me a clip on his phone. My father at a podium, my mother and brother flanking him. He was speaking about sacrifice and family values, the words rolling like polished stones, every sentence erasing me a little more. That night, a new letter arrived, my mother's handwriting hesitant. "I'm sorry. I stood still too long. I want to meet Rachel before it's too late." Tears blurred the ink as I read. I ached to hold her, and yet the anger pulsed. Why only now? Why always from the shadows? I filled out the volunteer papers for the frontline medical unit the next morning. If my father wanted to bury me in silence, then I would carve my own name where no one could deny it, written not in headlines, but in blood, sweat, and an unshakable vow to be more than what he left behind. 20 years had passed since that storm in Maine, but the memory still lived in my bones. The girl dragging her suitcase down an icy hill seemed like someone else, yet she was always with me, pushing every step forward. Now I stood in a crisp dress uniform, the weight of silence and scars balanced by the single star waiting to be pinned on my shoulder. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she fastened it. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her suit sharp, no longer the child curled against me in a drafty attic, but a woman who had made her own way in the world. When the silver caught the light, applause rose around us, filling the hall with a roar that almost drowned out the pounding in my chest. I straightened, chin lifted, but in that split second, the faces blurred, and all I saw was the younger me, shivering in the dark, whispering promises to survive. I carried proof of those promises close. In the pocket of my uniform was an old letter, the one my mother had once risked to send. The ink had bled in places, the paper worn thin from being unfolded and refolded over the years. I kept it not because the words made everything right, but because it reminded me that even in weakness, there had been a flicker of love. The ceremony moved on with speeches and salutes, but when I stepped down from the podium, my phone buzzed. I nearly ignored it, but the number froze me in place. I pressed it to my ear, and her voice, softer, older, trembling, poured through the line. "Your father. He's very sick. He wants to see you. We'd like to come to your reception." I didn't answer at first. The applause was still echoing, yet all I heard was the scrape of my suitcase on Maine gravel, the slam of a door, the finality in his eyes. For 2 decades, there had been silence, not a visit, not a word. And now, on the day I wore a star he never dreamed I could earn, they wanted to appear as if we had been whole all along. I stood motionless, Rachel watching me with concern as the crowd pressed forward to offer congratulations. My throat tightened, 100 possible responses colliding. Was this repentance or performance? A man facing his own mortality or another attempt to control the story? But I knew one thing. I wasn't the girl at the bottom of the porch steps anymore. Whatever their reasons, I had carried my own name through fire, and I was strong enough to look them in the eye. I slipped the phone into my pocket and drew a long breath. This time, I wouldn't run. If they came, I would face them, on my terms, in my house, beneath the star on my shoulder. The reception had the kind of hum that fills a house with life, voices weaving together, laughter rising from corners, the sound of glasses clinking, soldiers in dress uniforms, neighbors, and colleagues streamed through the front doors, while Albert, precise as ever, kept the guest list in one hand like a sacred text. I moved among the crowd, shaking hands, hearing the same words again and again. Congratulations, proud, honor. I smiled, steady on the outside, though my chest carried the weight of the call I'd received days earlier. Out at the gate, I heard the crunch of tires over gravel. I didn't need to look to know. My pulse quickened as Albert straightened, pen poised. A silver sedan idled just beyond the ironwork. The driver's door opened, and my brother stepped out, suit pressed too sharply, his movements stiff as if the air itself were hostile. My mother followed, her wool coat buttoned to the chin, clutching her purse as though it might shield her from judgment. And in the back seat, slow and deliberate, my father lingered. His hand pressed the doorframe, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the ground. He had aged into frailty, but even in his diminished frame, he carried the shadow of authority he had once wielded like a weapon. Albert's voice carried across the quiet like a church bell. "Are you here to see General Ellsworth?" The question hung between them and the gate, and for a moment, nobody answered. My mother's hand went to her chest. My brother dropped his eyes, unable to hold the weight of the words. And my father, the man who once cut me out of his life without hesitation, sat frozen, the title catching in his throat like something he couldn't swallow. Albert, courteous but unyielding, repeated himself. The air thickened until finally my mother whispered, "Yes, we are here to see our daughter." Albert nodded, opened the gate, and motioned them through as if ushering them into a sanctuary. Inside, the air changed. Conversations dulled as they stepped into the foyer. People turned, curiosity sharpening into silence. My brother hovered near the wall. My mother's arm brushed mine hesitantly. But my father, he stood in the center, hands folded, eyes darting as though searching for a script that no longer existed. He cleared his throat, tried to summon that old cadence. "We all make mistakes," he began, voice straining for confidence. "What matters is that we move on." The words struck me like a familiar slap, the same pattern of dismissal wrapped in borrowed humility. I set down my glass and faced him fully. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the room, calm but sharp. "We don't move on. Not yet. First we tell the truth." The silence was absolute. The chaplain lowered his head. A captain shifted his weight, the medals on his chest catching light. My father's lips trembled, his eyes blinking rapidly, the old defenses crumbling. For the first time in my life, I saw him without the armor of pride. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. His voice faltered, but didn't break. "I was wrong." The words dropped like stones in water, rippling outward. "I was cruel." He inhaled shakily, his chest rising with the weight of decades. "I cast you out because of my pride." My mother covered her mouth with her hand. My brother's eyes flicked to me, wide and unsettled. Around us, the crowd seemed to lean in as if bearing witness to something holy. And then my father did what I thought I would never see. He bowed his head, no grand gesture, no sermon, just the slow bend of a man who had run out of lies. For the first time in my life, he lowered himself, not to a congregation, not to a community, but to me. The room held its breath, and in that pause, the girl who once walked into the storm outside her family's home was finally seen, not as a disgrace, but as the woman who had endured, risen, and stood unshaken. A few weeks later, I opened my home on Christmas Eve. Snow drifted steady outside, muffling the street, while the bells from the church down the hill carried through the cold night air. Inside, warmth wrapped around us, the fire low, the table set, candles flickering soft. On the wall hung a single frame with 3 photographs side by side. Me at 19, dragging a suitcase into the storm on the Maine coast. Me, the day I earned my commission. Rachel, in a blue dress, pinning the bar to my shoulder. And me now, in full dress uniform, standing before this very house, its windows bright with light. My mother touched the glass and wept quietly, her shoulders shaking. My father stood still, his hands trembling against one another. No words left. Rachel smiled, her voice steady as she said, "Family isn't who never breaks your heart. It's who shows up with glue." I looked around the table and knew the victory wasn't over him. It was over myself. At last, I had a family, in the truest sense of the word, had a family. But this time, it was on my terms.